Towel out of the frame, get the towel out of the frame. Okay. What's up, friends? Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Pam, and today I have a great comprehensive video. Well, I think it's great. I have a comprehensive video about philodendrons for you. And we're also going to look at my philodendron collection. I'm going to take you around the house and show you all of my philodendrons. I do have a couple here for examples, as well as a plant that is often called a philodendron, but actually isn't. We'll get to that. It should be a good primer on the kind of philodendrons that you can add to your own collection. So before we get into the little philodendron tour and the care tips, let's just talk about philodendrons in general. Where do they live? Who found them? What does the name mean? So the name philodendron, which if you were to be a real purist would technically be philodendron, but that just sounds really weird, so I'm just going to say philodendron. Philo translates to love or affection, and dendron comes from the root word for tree, so love tree, affection tree. I think that's pretty good. That's pretty spot on. So philodendrons can often be mistaken with monsteras, the Metaphyllum, which we will get to, pothos, and even Syndapsis. Philodendrons are a Neotropical genus, and it comprises of about 482 formally recognized species. While most of them are in those humid tropical forests, they are found sometimes along the sides of roads and riverbeds and things like that. So they're a pretty adaptable genus in general. So we first started to see mentions of plants that were later identified as philodendrons in the 1600s, both in folklore and then in private collections. We know they've been used as houseplants since the Victorian times, and it was Charles Plumier that first introduced a few species of them to scientists. He's better known for his discovery and naming of begonias as well as fuchsias, but it was actually Heinrich Wilhelm Schott, or Schott. I'll put his name on the screen. He's the one that actually named the genus Philodendron, and he described it in 1829. Something that I found very interesting as I was researching for this video is that, like a lot of areas of botany, the actual fossil history of philodendrons, meaning like its very beginning origins and how it spread around the Neotropical region, is not really well studied and not exactly decided on by really anybody. There have been a few comprehensive studies as far as I could find. I was only able to actually look at one because education and research is gatekept by capitalism, but that is another story. But from what I could find, at least as of the 90s, we haven't even found any fossiled pollen matter. So this study of phylogeny or phylogeny is an area that if you were interested in going into could probably use some more bodies and money. So the one study that I was able to read, and I have a very small brain, so I could only understand it from a layman's, outlook. But from what I read, they had taken a look at 68 philodendron species, and they were able to draw some conclusions about where they were located and how they spread around, and a lot of that was focused on the mixing of the philodendron species and its very close cousin, the Homolamina family. So the study that I was able to look at, they basically made the case that their philodendrons had become diversified somewhere in the Miocene age, which, let me look at my notes here, is the first geological epoch of the Neogene period that extends from about 23.03 to 5.333 million years ago. So if you want to do some deep nerding out, definitely check out the resources in the description box below. I had a good time trying to make sense of everything. So when it comes to identifying philodendrons, you want to definitely look at, like most aroids, you want to look at the inflorescence more than the leaves, because the differentiation between juvenile leaves on philodendron and the mature leaves can be really vast. So I'll try and put some pictures up on the screen for you, but an inflorescence is actually different than a flower. So plants that have a spathe and spadix inflorescence, as opposed to a flower, would be your philodendrons, your monsteras, colocasias, caladiums, things like that, aroids. Anthurium is another really common one that you will see that. So you can think of the spathe sort of as the thing that holds the flowers, in the sense that the spathe will be like the cup around the spadix, which is the little spiky bit, and the flowers actually line the spadix inside of the spathe. So it's not an actual flower in and of itself, though sometimes we colloquially will refer to them that way. I've definitely made that mistake on my channel, and as I've like thrown myself into self-learning botany and the proper terms and everything, I am gonna start trying to correct my language a lot better on my videos. So that spathe is actually just sort of a modified leaf or bract. It's not a flower again, so I thought that was very interesting. And you can sort of notice the behavior on especially those red anthuriums, you know, the ones that you will see in the grocery store all the time. They're very common. If you have those, you may notice that sometimes those red spathes will turn green in the wintertime particularly, and they're doing that because they are a modified leaf, and what they're doing is turning themselves into a green leaf, basically, so that they can help the plant take in sunlight and feed itself, because in the winter there's less light, so that red spathe becomes green, which another thing I have learned. But back to philodendrons. So we look at those inflorescences because they are pretty uniform between philodendrons, whereas the leaves just are not. So philodendrons in particular are pollinated by scarab beetles. I'm going to put the scientific name below for you. Now, bees and bats can also pollinate these plants, but for the most part we know that those beetles are the primary evolutionary target, if you will, of the inflorescence on a philodendron. And I also was looking at an article, which I will have linked below again, where it described the thermogenesis involved in attracting and keeping beetles inside of that inflorescence so that they can help pollinate the plant, as well as giving them sort of a warm little love nest to mate with their partners in. I swear to God, you'll have to read the article. It's like an Airbnb, you know, for these beetles. It's like, hey, you wanna bring your lady over here. Scientists aren't entirely sure, or they have not yet agreed on how the beetles, whether it be scent or sight, find these inflorescences to land in and mate in and eat in. But one of the running theories right now is because of that thermogenesis. They think that the beetles may be able to see, like as in a thermal camera, like be able to see the inflorescence. They also think that the warming of the inflorescence may intensify the scent to the beetles, which is pretty cool. The beetles will actually usually spend the night in the spathe and spadix, but the scientists did observe that they tend to become less active, do less mating, less eating, and fly away once that inflorescence cools down. So it does seem to be the warmth of the inflorescence that is a key factor in attracting the beetles and keeping them there. Another thing to note on insect symbiosis with philodendrons, if you have ever noticed that the stems and just bits of your philodendron have this sticky, nectary little droplets on them. I know when I first got plants, I was terrified that those were pests, but when I would touch them, they would just be this sticky little substance. And what that is actually there for is to attract ants, which will be crawling all over the plant, and they provide a protective relationship for the philodendron, which I thought was pretty neat, because usually, and that comes from the extrafloral nectaries is what it's called. And that kind of grossed me out a little bit until I realized what it was for. So that's kind of cool, right? So as we get into talking about the way philodendrons grow, I wanted to touch on this plant right here, which is really commonly referred to as a philodendron, and it actually isn't. When I purchased it, I was told it was a philodendron hope, and people will tell me all the time that it's different kinds of plants, but what it actually is the Thaumatophyllum bipennaphetum. Believe it's how you say it. I'll put it on the screen. Anyway, this plant has been officially reclassified as a Thaumatophyllum, so it is not a philodendron. And one of the reasons they knew that is because of the growth habit of the plant, the way that it grows out in this like form. It's just not similar to the way that philodendrons grow. So you'll notice if you really look at it, it honestly doesn't really look like a philodendron. I just thought I would let you guys know in case you do have one of these plants. And these are often called the tree philodendron too, because they get absolutely enormous. But the way that they grow out in this basket kind of just this way is one of the reasons why it has been reclassified. So the genus Philodendron was also subdivided into three subgenres, three different categories. I told you, I don't have a very big brain, okay? I'm doing my best. So I'm going to put the names on the screen in case I butcher the pronunciation. It is the Meconostigma, Pteromecium, and Philodendron. And it was the Meconostigma subgenre that was actually reclassified into Thaumatophyllum. So a lot of us know philodendrons as epiphytic plants, and there are a couple kinds of those as well. There are ones that will start out in the forest canopy and work their way down, and then there are ones that start on the forest floor and work their way up. And then of course, one feature of philodendrons that we all sort of recognize is that a lot of them have aerial and subterranean roots, meaning the roots that come out of your plant, you know, outside of the soil or potting mix, and then the subterranean roots which are in the potting mix or soil. A thing I see asked on the internet a lot is what to do with those aerial roots. And we see this with Monstera as well when we have the Monstera deliciosa, which has those big, thick aerial roots. Something I read a few times from a lot of trustworthy sources was that if you are having smaller and just less impressive leaves at the upper part of your plants, to start shoving those aerial roots into the soil, and that will actually help bring some of that moisture and nutrients up to the top of the plant a little bit more efficiently and quickly. I thought that was a pretty cool thing, so I'm experimenting with that right now, and I will let you guys know how it goes. If you have a lot of philodendrons or you've been keeping them for a while, you may have heard or be familiar with the idea of giving them something to climb up on, such as a moss pole or cocoa coir pole in this case. And the reason that they will do better climbing up something is because that's how it works in the wild. So in contrast to the philodendrons that want to climb up or trail down, we have what's called a self-heading philodendron, which is, for example, this one. This is a Philodendron Moonlight. Gets these really beautiful neon green leaves when they first come out, and then they darken to these darker green leaves. Love this philodendron. This is another one that has a lot of those extra floral nectaries around it, so it's usually a little sticky. She's a wet ass philodendron. But these guys tend to not need anything to climb up because they are a self-heading philodendron. So if you see that, you will know that it is something like this, which is a little bit more compact. You can also see the aerial roots in this guy as well. And if you see all of these crunchy brown things right here, these are what are called cataphils. And those are more often found on the vining philodendrons. So this right here is actually an emerging leaf, but this here is one of those cataphils, and that is the little bit, it's when you first see a leaf coming out, it will sort of be like a ridge, you know, coming off the petiole, and as the new leaf grows out, that cataphil will start to fall back, it will brown, it might fall off or get crunchy or just hang there. So those would technically be called deciduous cataphils because they do brown and die off, essentially. I do this a lot. I'm sorry. It's my planty jazz hands. So you can see with this plant as an example that the other function of aerial roots is often to attach the philodendron to the tree or whatever it would be climbing up, in this case a cocoa pole. You can differentiate what those aerial roots are for, usually because the ones that are meant for attaching tend to be shorter and a little bit thinner, and then the ones that are seeking out the moisture and nutrients will be thicker and grow all the way down. So let's talk a little bit about philodendron care and the kind of environment that they like best. Now, of course, this will differentiate between some of the different kinds of philodendron, but generally, you're looking for a light range of 3,000 to 5,000 foot candles. that is technically considered shade. You don't want to have them in direct sunlight, but you can't have them in too dark a light either. They may not thrive. They prefer a temperature of around 75 to 85 degrees in the wild especially, but I can tell you that my house hangs around the 65-degree temperature, and that's in Fahrenheit. I'll put the Celsius right here. And they've all been pretty fine. I do notice that they really do not like being near cold glass and cold windows in the wintertime, so just be mindful of that. Another variety that I saw referenced with a more specific light range was the Melanochrysum, which does like a little bit of a brighter light. As far as troubleshooting goes, it is normal for the lower leaves to yellow and eventually start to fall away. You can see on mine, this lower leaf is starting to get a little sad, so eventually that will probably fall off, and that is fine. However, if the leaves do crisp up, turn brown, and fall off first without having that gradual yellowing period, you may want to look and see if that plant is maybe too close to a hot air source or if it is being underwatered. But outside of that, most yellowing, when it's related to watering issues at least, is from overwatering. And a good way to check and see if you're overwatering your plants is to just try to pop them out of the pot. I'm not going to do it with this one because I don't feel like vacuuming, but if you can just sort of wiggle your plants out of the pot, you might need to run a butter knife or something around the rim very gently first if your plant hasn't been repotted in a while. But just take a peek at the roots and see if you see any black mushiness, you know, what you would like, think of old lettuce, you know, just that mushy, slimy feeling. But if you don't see any of that, then you can probably rule out the overwatering related root rot. As far as potting mix for these plants go, I definitely recommend something as chunky and airy as you can get. Not orchid bark kind of chunky, like not a orchid mix kind of chunky, but something with that mixed in kind of chunky. I have recently been playing around, and this is not sponsored, I bought this with my own money and I didn't tell Becca until afterwards, but I have been loving Becca de la Plance's collab with tank soil. It's called De La Tanks. I will put some info down in the box for you. I've really been enjoying using that so far. It just drains very quickly, but it still retains moisture, which is just the ideal that you want. You want that plant to be able to drain all that excess water out and maintain a little bit of moisture until the next watering, so that you're not over flooding your plants and you're also not drying them out, you know, every few days until you get around to watering. So I've been really happy with that soil mix and I'm probably gonna stick with it. And that's saying a lot because I have a personal hookup at a soil store. So as with most houseplants, if you notice that your philodendrons are really leggy, there's a lot of space between the nodes and there maybe shouldn't be, that is probably an indication that your plant's not getting enough light, or at least enough intensity of light. And they are plants that will tend to lean towards the window, so you can combat that by like slowly rotating. I've definitely done that with this plant, which was very weighted to one side, and I've just been slowly rotating it and it's sort of wrapping itself around the pole because I have been doing that. Pay attention to how your plants are growing, and a lot of times that will tell you what they need. So if your plant is got some spotting on it and it just looks generally unwell. Malaise is a word that was used in my houseplant expert book. That is probably a sign of spider mites, which are a just bastard enemy of the philodendron. A lot of times by the time you've noticed spider mites are happening, it is a bit too late to just quickly brush it off and move on with your life. If you want a really comprehensive and effective method for treating spider mites, I definitely recommend Rachel from Heart Shaped Leaves. Her video on spider mites and her method with the makeup brush is just mwah, works so good. I will try to remember to put that down in the description box below, which is just gonna have so many links in it. So if your plant is getting some crispiness around the edges and tips, you can generally blame some kind of direct temperature offense for that. So maybe it's near a heater if your tips are burning, or perhaps it was touching some cold glass or something like that. So just have a look at the environment around the plant, make sure there's nothing that is too hot or too cold. So for your plants with fenestrations and holes, if you want to encourage more of those, one of the tips that I found in my classic houseplant guides was, again, to shove those aerial roots into the dirt and to make sure, excuse me, potting mix. I'm trying to break my habit of saying dirt. And you're gonna wanna make sure that your plants are being properly fertilized. And you can do that with a gentle houseplant fertilizer. You can usually cut them down by half and give those to your plants every 2 to 3 weeks. A lot of people will take the winter off as well from fertilizing. So if you're watching this when I post it, you know, they're probably okay. Compost tea is another really gentle way you can fertilize your plants, and you can definitely do that, you know, maybe once over the winter, and you won't really hurt anything. It's a very, very gentle way to fertilize things in a time where your plants are growing slowly, so they're not really able to use up a whole lot of nutrients. But a little 1-1-1 never hurt no one. Okay, so we have talked ad nauseum about these beautiful plants, so now let's take a walk around and I will show you each and every one of my philodendrons.